Welcome to the Extraordinary Podcast, where we identify God's uncommon work in common life. Recognizing God's work requires intentionality, but articulating it motivates and inspires. Don't forget to subscribe to never miss an episode. In today's episode, I have a conversation with Ken Hyndman, which really explores his spiritual journey and how God made it clear to him what his calling is. So let's get into the conversation with Ken. Ken, thank you for being a guest on our podcast today. We appreciate you taking the time to share with us. And as we begin, you grew up as a pastor's kid. Can you explain to us what that was like?
Sure. My dad was a pastor and my grandpa was a pastor. They were both bivocational pastors. And so I'll back up to my grandpa first. He owned a sawmill in Michigan, and he would pastor small churches in Canada. And so he'd drive from Michigan to Canada every weekend and pastor his church, and then go back to his sawmill, work on the week. And my dad, from the time I was in first grade on, pastored various churches. And so he pastored in Canada when I was in first grade, and he pastored in Michigan, and he pastored in Iowa here. And so when I was 10 years old, my dad moved us to Burlington, Iowa. So that's when I first moved here. And he took a church, the Free Methodist Church here in Burlington. And let's see, your question was, what's like?
What was life like growing up as a pastor's kid?
Yeah, so like at the Burlington church, so I'm 10 years old. It's a little church, and it's in the south side of Burlington, and there's lots of people with lots of needs, and my dad really had a heart for people. These churches never paid very much for the little churches, but he would always work full-time in another job to support us, as well as doing the pastorate. And so, when I was young, I mowed the lawn for the church. There was no pay for that. You just did it. You did it for the Lord. And me and my sister would take the mop and mop the floors in the sanctuary, because they were wooden floors. And we would take the vacuum and vacuum the floors. And we lived in the back of the church when we first moved here. And so every time you want to have Sunday school classes, well, that's in your house. It's every time the church is open, your house is open, and you have church in your house. And so it was you talk about living in a glass house. That was living in a glass house for sure. But we would fold the bulletins every Sunday, by hand. And eventually I think they got a folder eventually, but for a lot of years we would just fold the bulletins by hand. And my dad would hand peck his sermons out with just one finger in each hand, because he didn't know how to type very well. And so either my mom, who knew how to type, would type out his sermons, or he would peck for his sermons every week. And but it was a family thing. Working in the church and serving the Lord was just something that was expected. Every time the doors were open, you were there. Of course, it's your home, so you're going to be there. There's no getting out of going to church when you're living in the church. But it was good. And then, my dad would take some bigger churches too. Like in Waterloo, he took a church that was closer to 100 people going to that church. And so we didn't have to do as much. There were more cleaning people and things like that helped out. And in Michigan, he had a church that was, he took two churches in Michigan, and the district, or they're called conference superintendents in that denomination, he said, well, we have these two churches 6 miles apart. We want you to come, and we want you to merge the two churches. One older church and one new church. That was a very difficult situation to be in. And my dad just loved people, but he had a hard time with that, merging those two churches. But he got it done within a year, as was his assignment, and it worked out. But of course, people have a lot of memories in that old church building, and it was still very difficult for a lot of people. So
now you moved a lot growing up.
Yeah.
What did you think about that?
Well, moving from Michigan in kindergarten to first grade in Canada was very different. You get there and they say, oh, you're not spelling color, C-O-L-O-U-R. You're supposed to be learning the French Canadian spelling for everything. and you don't know the metric system. We got to get you going on that, and all these changes. So so it was really different. And then moving to second grade in Concord, Michigan again, then having to relearn everything, it was challenging. And so by the time we moved a lot, between my dad being a chemical engineer and a pastor, we moved. I had 8 different schools in the 12 years. By the time I graduated high school, I'd gone to 8 different schools. So, and quite different. So you learn that, that song that used to be out when I was a kid, the new kid in town, that I really related to that because I was always the new kid in town. And my sister, Pam, she, when she'd move with us, she did not like moving. She hated it even worse than I did because you just start developing friendships and then you're moving away, right away. So, but, the Lord was in it, and I'm thankful for Christian parents. I'm thankful that they loved the Lord. They taught us about the Lord, and my grandparents, when I was, up until I was 5 years old, my mom would work at Sears and Roebuck Catalog Company, and she'd drop us kids off at my grandma's house. And my grandma, being a pastor's wife and a Sunday school teacher, she'd get out her big Bible stories, and she would read us a Bible story every day. And while we were preschoolers, we accepted the Lord as our personal Savior at very young ages because Grandma really invested a lot of time in telling us about the Lord, and so did my parents. So I'm thankful for that Christian heritage. I really am. It's been good.
Well, that's great. A lot of interesting experiences, but as you said, it's this spiritual investment. That's the biggest thing you take away. So thank you for that. Now, you mentioned your dad was a chemical engineer. Can you explain to us a little bit more what that was and what he did?
Yeah, he worked in. So when we were in Michigan, his specialty was plating. So he would do plating. He started out with Goodyear making tires, and he was a chemist making tires, and then he started working for this other company where he would plate seat belts. So he would do the plating of seat belts. In Michigan, they make cars, so you find jobs that had to do with cars pretty much. And then when he moved to General Electric, his specialty was plating, so he started plating silver and gold, the little contact points, and I don't totally understand all of it, but they make switchgear, and he would do the plating. He was an expert on the plating parts. And one time he was working on this one machine that was, it was supposed to clean the parts before you plate them, and it's called a cyanide bath machine, and it's high pressurized cyanide that goes through this machine, and all of a sudden the hose on the machine broke, and it just started going like this, like a snake, and shooting cyanide. And my dad was right over the machine, and he said he was so surprised he just opened his mouth and he got a mouthful of cyanide. And so he's telling us this, and he right away, guys at the shop got him to some kind of eye wash booth and washed his mouth out, washed his face off, got that cyanide out as best they could, and he spitting. But he had to do more than that. He had to get to the hospital, and a doctor had to do a thorough cleansing of his mouth before he could ever swallow. And we're just thankful that my dad still, he lived to be 88 years old and lived through that for years and years. And, cyanide's very deadly, and we're just so thankful that he made it through. And I know I've spoken to groups about how I feel like sin is candy-coated cyanide, that it may taste good for a little while, but just like Romans 3:23 says, the wages of sin is death, and that sin will lead to death if you don't do something about it. And so I just at an early age made the decision to accept the Lord as my personal Savior, and I dealt with that sin problem. And then as things came up in my life, I've had to come back to the Lord, just like when my child would do something wrong and say, "I'm sorry, Lord, I messed up. Please forgive me." And He has always been faithful to do that. And so So my dad was great mechanically. He was a great chemical engineer, but he was also a pastor. And he used to talk about how when he'd go to the shop, he felt like he could serve even more people at his large factories than he could from the pulpit, because he was in small churches that you only have so much influence where you're at. So he would take every opportunity to try and help people. And many, many people at General Electric, quite a few, had weddings and things like that, had my dad do their weddings. Even though they'd never come to our church, he would still perform things like that for them. And I just remember helping him even when he was in his 80s. We're walking through Walmart. So many people would come up to him and say, Pastor Ken, how you doing? It's so great to see you. You know, I remember when, and just talking about days of his times when he's ministered to them. So it was very rewarding life. So.
Now, you just referred to your dad as Pastor Ken. Your name is Ken as well.
Right.
You're also an ordained minister. Can you share with us your call to ministry?
Sure. So I started going to this church when I was a teenager, every once in a while, because there wouldn't be very many teens in my dad's church. And so sometimes I'd sneak away and come over here because they had a bigger teen group and there was more going on, and they had Sunday school classes for teens and Sunday night after church for teens, all kinds of stuff going on. So I would come over here, and then when I became a young adult, I started coming back here when I was about 22, 23 years old. And I met my wife Lori here at this church. I'm going to go kind of around the bout to get there. But we were both in the singles group at the church, and now here my daughter has met her spouse here at this church, and it's so special to me. I mean, I just can't explain how wonderful it is to have my daughter find a Christian man that is great for her right here at this church. Well, anyway, so we get married here in this church, and Pastor Palmer was our pastor back then, and he gave us pastoral counseling and everything like that. And we start getting really involved in the church, and I can remember Dana Pogamiller was our Sunday school teacher, and we were learning so much about dynamics of discipleship was one class we took, and spiritual gifts workshop, and Pastor Palmer was preaching on holiness all the time, and it started clicking in my mind. I'd been a Christian for since I was a preschooler, but you know, I was serving the Lord, but I wanted to go deeper with the Lord at that point in my life. And so I remember going to the altar back in the spring of, I believe it was 1986, and asking the Lord, to completely sanctify me. I started hearing about the sanctification message, which I had known about growth in grace and things like that, so I started learning about entire sanctification, and I just said, whatever the Lord has for me, that's what I want. And from then on, I had an opportunity to be Doug Carl was over the youth and over the leading the singing back then, and he had just taken another assignment, and so we needed somebody to be over the youth at this church. And I said, well, I'll help out with the youth. And so I became the NYI president, started serving on the church board. And I started feeling the Lord calling me to some kind of ministry. I didn't know exactly that it would be pastoral ministry. All I knew was I wanted to do whatever God wanted me to do. And so then I started feeling a calling to go back to, I had a degree in chemistry and mathematics, but back to Bible college and get a degree in the Bible. So that's what I did. I went to Bernard Bible College with my wife, Lori, and she didn't have any college at that time, so she went all 4 years and got her Bible degree. Way, way better at me than at remembering Bible trivia and all that stuff. She way outshines me. But we had a great time at Bible college, and the Lord just kind of worked on us. While I was there at Bible college, we were serving in Youth for Christ, so we had a junior high youth group that we would help out with. And they would give us a $2,000 scholarship towards our college for helping out with that. And then I'd work a full-time job in addition to that, and I'd go to school full-time. And we made it through college. And you know, when the board asked me, you have to go through the board of studies and the board of credentials to get your ordination. They asked me about, okay, well, tell us about your calling. And I had to say, I have to be honest, I didn't really feel like I was definitely called into like a preaching kind of ministry, not into public speaking, because I'm a shy kind of guy. I'm very shy. I don't really like public speaking at all, but I'm willing to do whatever God has me do. And while I was at this church, I learned in a spiritual gifts workshop that I have the gift of faith and the gift of helps. So I love it, absolutely. I just love helping people. Mm-hmm. So that's the way God wired me. So I said, anything that I can do to help people, I don't care if it's being a pastor or being some other profession, I want to help people. And so I got my degree. I got a degree in pastoral ministries and church administration, and I did pastor a couple of churches as a senior pastor, and I pastored as an assistant pastor. But my love, my heart is to helping people.
So can you speak then to, you now work, I guess what we refer to as a secular job. Can you speak to that transition? Because you were in pastoral ministry, mm-hmm. and now you are in a secular job. Can you speak to that transition?
Sure. So my first church in pastoral ministry was the Rose Hill Community Church. And there was an ordained elder from the Church of the Nazarene, Ralph Sprunk, that was the senior pastor there. And he was also over homiletics at my college. So he taught preaching. And he said, he asked me to be his assistant pastor there. And it was a huge honor. He'd been at that church for 23 years. And he'd also been a professor at the Bible college. So I came and I was his assistant pastor for a year. And he said, okay, I need you to lead singing. Well, that's really not my area, but okay, I'll lead singing. And then I would preach when he was gone, and I'd preach sometimes while he was there. And it was a huge honor to be his assistant. And then I got a knock on my door one day, and it's District Superintendent Whitlatch was at my door knocking, and he says, I hear that you're a Nazarene. And I said, yeah, I got married in the Nazarene church, and I was a member of the Nazarene in Burlington, and right now I'm pastoring this small community church. He said, well, we've got a church 35 miles away that needs a pastor, and it's going to close if you don't come. And so I prayed about it. And my church that I had was running, I don't know, maybe 20 to 30 people, and then when you'd have a special occasion, then it'd be a lot more than that. We'd fill the church, when the kids had a program or something, mm-hmm. like, or Easter or Christmas. But so I said, okay, we'll pray about it. We prayed about it, and we thought, well, we're Nazarenes. Let's go ahead and accept this, even though it's 35 miles from our home, which is quite a drive. And it's, to be honest, it was not very much money. It was $100 a week, but we said, okay, we'll do it. So for 4 years, I pastored the Church of the Nazarene in Deep River, and it was a great experience. I mean, our first week, we had my wife and I and 5 people in the congregation. So there's 7 people all together in our church, and we just said, okay, we'll be here Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and we're gonna try and build this church. And so on Wednesday nights, I said, let's have a prayer meeting in somebody's house so we don't have to heat up the building every Wednesday night. But let's, half of us, let's go out and call on people, and the other half of us, let's pray for us, because we need the Lord's help. We gotta either build this church or close this church. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, we got quite a few people to come to the church, and a number of people got saved. I think in the 6 years I was pastoring, we had 15 people get saved, and so that was just really wonderful. Yeah. What better results can mm-hmm. you have in small towns? And the Deep River didn't have industry there, didn't even have a grocery store. It was pretty lots of children there and lots of senior citizens there and some people on welfare, but not a very affluent community. But people that really needed the Lord, and the Lord helped us through that. And my wife, I thank my wife. If you're in a small church and you're a pastor, your wife ends up doing all kinds of things. My wife's been Sunday school superintendent. She's been missions director. She's been right at my side the whole time. And I struggle with remembering names of people. I tell my wife, get right beside me at the back door. Help me to remember everybody's name, because I'm terrible at that. That's just one of my weaknesses. Yeah. So she would help me all the way through, and it really was great. Even though we never made a lot of money, the Lord blessed us.
Now, what do you do now?
Okay, so I'm sorry, I didn't transition.
No, you're fine.
So while I was in Deep River, $100 a week doesn't pay the bills. So I had to find a full-time job, and I started looking for something meaningful, and I found the Christian Opportunity Center, which is serves people with disabilities, and was serving over 200 people with disabilities in our area at that time. So they're in Oskaloosa, Pella, Indianola, Des Moines, places like that. So I started working for them as a job coach, and while I was coaching, I was at Pella Plastics, had a crew of 10 people that had never really hadn't had work outside of a sheltered workshop before, and they were people with intellectual disabilities and other disabilities. And I started teaching them how to do factory work for Pella Plastics. We'd make bird feeders, we'd assemble all kinds of things, cut the flashing off the plastic before it goes out, and box things up and ship them out. So I found that was so fulfilling to help those people with special needs to have their first job. And I kept coming, there were all kinds of situations that would come up. The first thing I said to the boss is, do you mind if I have devotions in the break room to start our day? And he let me. So I said, great. So working for a Christian organization, they were great with that. They encouraged that. So I started having devotions every morning just before we'd start work. And then I noticed that every year at the end of the year, people would get bonus checks, and the president of the company would go around and hand everybody a bonus check. But my little crew of 10 people never got a bonus check. So I go walking into the president's office, and he's a wonderful guy, and I just think it must not, didn't think about it. So I said, even, I don't care what the amount is, but everybody should, if you're going to give out bonus checks in public like that, everybody should get a bonus check. And everybody's important. And he agreed with me right away, and he started giving out bonus checks to everybody. And I said, my people aren't invited to the company picnic. Can't everybody be invited to come? Oh, yeah. We hadn't thought about that. We were contracted workers coming in that was a little different than the normal workers, but everybody deserves to be treated with respect and dignity, and that they did too. Every time I came with a request, they were very gracious about it and did. So I found that with my gift of helps and faith, that helping people, especially people with disabilities, what I've been doing for over 30 years now, is really fulfilling, and it's what God wired me to do. So I'm thankful anytime I can get in a job where I'm helping people like that.
And you've told me stories before of individual situations where you've helped someone or invested in someone that others may have written off or said that it's not worth my time. And just your compassion that Jesus has given you. But I think you bring up a really good point that you had some help figuring out your gifts. Right. You just didn't wake up one morning and say, this is what I want to do. Yes. Now, on some level, you have to own your gifts and your passions that Jesus has given you. But it was a spiritual gift assessment or something of that nature that said, this is where God has gifted you. And now, those assessments aren't always perfect.
Yeah, right.
But they do help us to have a baseline for us to be able to see how we can serve Jesus effectively. And so essentially what you've done is you've leaned into the gifts that Jesus has given you. I just have been inspired by how much compassion you have for others.
Thank you.
And I know that probably makes you uncomfortable with me saying that, but really just sharing your heart about how you were looking out for people that others overlooked. Now, your boss probably wasn't trying to be negligent.
No.
But that happens. Mm-hmm. And if we don't point it out, if we don't advocate for the oppressed or the marginalized or the forgotten, mm-hmm. they're going to be oppressed or marginalized or forgotten. Yeah. Which Matthew 25, where Jesus talks about caring for the least of these. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's inspiring and challenging your efforts and how you've lived into your call. And I know I'm talking a lot, so I apologize, but just thinking about your journey of, you have that experience on a Sunday morning of Jesus, I don't know what you want me to do. I just know I want to do what you want me to do. Right. And I think if we use that as a starting point with authenticity and sincerity, mm-hmm. then we will be able to spend 30 years or however many years living into the passions that Jesus has given us and making a difference in that way.
Yeah, I think, when I first started thinking about a career, I was just thinking, okay, my dad's a chemist, my dad's a pastor, try those fields, but God's gifted each one of us differently. And if you just say, Lord, I want to serve you, show me where to go and what to do, eventually you'll figure it out. It takes a little while sometimes, but for me, it took a while. I did a number of different jobs, little jobs, just to get by. But then when you find something that you're passionate about and you love, then going to work is fun. It's great. So that's what I love about serving in the helping people with disabilities or serving people. It's fun and great most of the time. Sometimes there's challenges there.
But you did have a subtle point that I think is important, that you tried a few other different things first.
Right.
So it's not like you're going to hit a home run on the first try. Sometimes you will. But I think if we really want to follow Jesus, we've got to be willing to try things mm-hmm. without having complete certainty.
Right.
So, man, this has been great. For those who are watching, I've got all these lists of questions that I have to ask you, but you answered most of them without me even asking, just because you're telling your story. And I think if we start with the starting point of Jesus, I just want to do what you want me to do, mm-hmm. then our story will naturally speak to Jesus. And so the last question I have there, if somebody is wanting to make a difference, where do you recommend they start? And find your passions. Just try and do it in the name of Jesus.
That's right.
And Jesus will get us to where we need to be.
That's right.
So, is there anything else on your heart that you wanted to share today?
I love the Lord, and He's never let me down. Lately I've been challenged with some medical things in my life. I've always said I didn't need doctors since I was in first grade and got my tonsils out. I haven't needed a doctor, but all of a sudden this past year, I've needed a lot of doctors, and I found out I have leukemia. I found out I have diabetes, like my dad had, and I had this great big blood clot in my leg, and so I had to be on blood thinners for this past year. And I'm still on blood thinners, but the Lord's with us every step of the way. And years ago, when being in disability services, I'd help people with all kinds of different physical ailments and mental health needs and things like that. And years ago, I bought Johnny Erickson's study Bible. And I thought, well, maybe this will help me help other people better, to read some of the notes that she's gone through from her physical ailments that she's dealt with. But I find reading that study Bible now is helping me as I'm going through some of those things that I never dreamt I would even have to worry about. Yeah. So, but as we age, it can happen to any of us, and the Lord's with me every step of the way, and I'm thankful for that. You just have to look for opportunities to serve in the ways that you can serve still. So,
That's right. That's a good word, good challenge for us today. So, well, Ken, thank you for being a guest on our show. Thank you for sharing and living out the life that Jesus called you to live. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this podcast. Be on the lookout for how God does uncommon work in common life. And please subscribe to never miss an episode.